Hi guys, welcome back to Binge Watch Britney. So in today's episode, we are going to be covering the new series, Selena and Yolanda, The Secrets Between Them. So I'm obviously a huge Selena fan. I've been watching pretty much everything that has come out about her. So I'm familiar with the Selena movie from 1997, I think, where J-Lo played Selena. And then there was also recently a Netflix TV series called Selena, I believe, just basically about her rise to fame and then her murder and all of that stuff. And so I'm very familiar with the story of Selena. Unfortunately, I didn't know anything about this series, and so I saw a commercial or like a preview for it somewhere. I can't recall if it was like on YouTube or on Reddit or something else, but I saw the promo basically for this TV series, and I was very intrigued because obviously they were setting it up to be basically Yolanda's time to tell her story about what really happened, and so obviously this is going to be really intriguing. I know that some people who are like huge Selena fans, they may find this series kind of like offensive, especially being that Selena is not here to defend herself. And so obviously this is going to have a mixed reaction from the world, from the Selena fan base, because of just the topic that we're talking about. I do want to go ahead and preface this episode and say that from what I can see in episode 1 so far, this is basically a contrast between Yolanda arguing from her side what happened, giving her defense, whatever, and then the cops and the lawyers obviously really sticking to the fact that they have the argument they have made in court has been regarding why Yolanda did this and all of that stuff. And so with all of that being said, let's go ahead and get into the episode. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and talk about the 5 key points of this episode. Again, this is not an entire season that we are reviewing, this is just one particular episode. So for key point number 1, Yolanda outs that Selena loved another man. I was really surprised that she dropped this bomb, but then didn't really say anything else about it. So I thought it was kind of done in a shady way. I think I've read about this somewhere. So I wasn't surprised when I heard it and when I heard someone close to her saying that. But I was really surprised by the fact that she didn't even elaborate on this. And I don't know if she's planning to do that in the other episodes that are going to be released or whatever. But I was really surprised that she just threw that out there because it didn't really seem relevant to what happened as far as leading to Selena's murder. And obviously this series is focusing on the secrets between them, so it makes sense that she would talk about the secrets that they had. This didn't really seem relevant in the sense of trying to argue that she is not the villain that everyone thinks she is. And I also want to highlight that I did think that this was gross of her to bring this out because, she's not really here to say whether or not this happened. And then we don't really know the person that Yolanda is speaking of and if that person is going to speak up or whatever. And so I just thought that, again, this wasn't really necessary in terms of if the motive of this series is to talk about how you're not the villain, this doesn't really help prove that point. And so it does speak to maybe how close you guys are, but I don't really feel that was a necessary point to bring out. But I do think that it was important that she brought out how Selena was keeping secrets from her family, because obviously this just, again, reiterates how close of a relationship that they had. And I think that this is something that's also pretty normal. Not everybody shares everything with their family members, and so they're going to have something that people in their family don't know anything about. Again, this just goes to show that they did have a close relationship. And going into my second point, Yolanda is accused of embezzlement. If you watched the movie and if you've read news articles about the situation, you know that they did get basically fan mail complaining about not getting what they paid for, wanting a refund, that sort of thing. And so we do have them talking about this meeting between Suzette Abraham and Selena just to talk about the fact that there was a check that was written by Yolanda to Yolanda, and it was basically her stealing money. They said that it wasn't just one check, it was like thousands of checks, whatever. And so we see that they had this conversation where they're basically confronting her about what she's doing, where the money is going, why the fans are complaining, that sort of thing. And so obviously this is covered in the Selena movie, and we are kind of getting a little bit more here from like the actual people involved in terms of Yolanda herself and the lawyers and the cops and that sort of thing. And so one thing I found really interesting is that we have, I think, a cop or a detective reiterating that Suzette had told him that basically Selena didn't stand up for Yolanda in this meeting. And then we have Yolanda herself saying, she did stand up for me. She told him to back off, or if he wasn't going to let me speak, whatever. And so we get kind of like a contrasting explanation of what happened in that meeting. I obviously have no opinion on what happened or not. I just want to present that we did get that contrast. And so we don't know really, depending on who you believe or who you want to believe, you may go with either person on what happened in this meeting. But what did happen in this meeting is they talked about the fact that there was money missing, and it seems like they basically parted ways with Yolanda at this meeting. But one thing we do get from Yolanda is that she points out that no charges were filed against her, and then she's also saying that there's no real evidence. And obviously this is a little bit confusing because we do see them repeatedly showing like this check that she wrote that was made out to herself, and then we also see like an example of like the fan mail that they got saying that they weren't getting anything, and so that kind of is evidence. But as far as having evidence of the fact that she herself is doing something wrong, I was a little bit confused on that, but I do just want to point out that that's the narrative that she's going with. She's saying there's no real evidence that she did anything wrong, and then she even goes as far as saying that the DA who was, I guess, involved in that case against her for embezzlement, that they basically dropped it because there was no evidence. And so that was definitely very interesting. I'm not sure if they're going to expand on that more in other episodes, but going on to what else I want to talk about in relation to this point of her embezzling from Selena, we do know that shortly after this meeting, she purchases a gun, and I thought it was interesting to know that, I guess during that time, I don't know if this is still the case in Texas, but there's actually a 3-day waiting period if you're trying to purchase a gun, so you can't just walk out right away with a gun. And so I thought that was very interesting. I don't know if other states do that, but I know that we do have a huge crisis with gun violence in our country today, and so it was really cool that they pointed out that there are laws in place that don't just allow you to walk out the same day with a gun. They also talk about the standoff with Yolanda after Selena has been shot, and so this is an almost 8-hour standoff, and one of the things they make a point to say is that the person who was talking to Yolanda on the phone, trying to get her to calm down and kind of turn herself in, I think this is Larry somebody, I can't recall his full name, so my apologies on that, but they are basically saying that he was the one who brought up the argument that this could have been an accident, and so he is basically trying to calm her down, and he's talking about you don't want the gun to accidentally go off, these things happen, that sort of thing. And they're saying that from this conversation is where Yolanda got the idea to say, this was an accident, I didn't mean to shoot her, the gun just went off, that sort of thing. And so I thought that was really interesting, because one thing that they did point out is that during this standoff, at no time did she accidentally fire the gun or shoot herself or anything like that. She was very in control of the gun, and she had it basically to her head the whole time. She's obviously hysterical. They're talking about how she was moving around in the car, and so there were opportunities for her to make a mistake and kind of accidentally trigger the gun to go off, and that didn't happen. And so that is obviously a very good contrast to what happened allegedly in the room, because how did the gun just accidentally go off in the room? But with you dealing with the gun for 9 hours and not making a mistake like that, that is a very interesting contrast. One thing I do want to highlight that I was sort of expecting them to make the argument in Yolanda's defense that with the gun, they talk about how she brought out the gun because she wanted to let Selena know like she was suicidal and stuff like that, and really just make her point that she was not in a good state or whatever. And I thought it was interesting that they did not make the argument that maybe when she shot Selena, that maybe she was trying to like shoot away from her and scare her, but didn't realize that she hit her or something like that. And so I was really intrigued that she didn't go that route and said that's what she was trying to do. And so obviously they're saying, you shot her, you intended to shoot her, and then you called her the B word as she was running away. And so I just thought that was interesting that wasn't the argument that she went with. And then I do want to take it back to something that the maid testified or gave a statement on, and she said that she heard Yolanda call Selena the B word as she was running away. And so obviously they are using this to say, hey, this is evidence that this was intentional, she was angry. And even one of the detectives or whatever said that when they were interrogating Yolanda, she in Spanish said something that to the effect that this was kind of like a crime of passion, there was rage involved, that sort of thing. And so one other interesting thing about the interrogation, I got the impression that nothing was recorded, and instead people just wrote down what they believed Yolanda was saying as she was being interrogated. But then there was news reports, like on TV, there was like the broadcasters saying that they heard basically taped audio of what she was saying, and so I was really confused by that. So I don't know if some parts were recorded and then other parts were just written down to translate what she was saying or whatever, or put it on paper. And so I was a little bit confused by that, but I thought it was interesting that they did bring up the fact that it seems like there's nothing that you can listen to go back and get a actual word for word accounting of what she said, because one of the things that they did bring up was that when you kind of are going off of how someone else has written something that they heard, you're kind of getting their interpretation of it. You're not getting what the person actually said. Now going into my third point, Yolanda's resignation letter. So this came up later in the episode, and they were basically talking about how once the hotel room was not a crime scene any longer, the hotel staff was able to go in the room, inventory it, clean it up, that sort of thing. And they found Yolanda's purse in the safe, and in that purse was a resignation letter. They did point out that it was dated like the March 11th or March 13th. I'm not sure what the date was, but it was after that initial meeting with the family to talk about the embezzlement of money from Selena's businesses. They also talked about how the letter was not signed by an attorney, so I don't know why she had this letter in her purse. But one of the things that they do talk about is that in the letter she stated that she was resigning and that she couldn't work for Selena any longer as her employee because certain people in her family made the day-to-day dealings difficult. And so obviously Yolanda's family is using this to say, she wasn't disgruntled, she was moving on with her life, she was trying to separate herself from you guys. And so they make a point to say that this letter was very valuable in her case, but they didn't really do anything with this letter. So one thing her family points out is that Selena's husband Chris gave a statement or something like that, basically saying that Selena was aware of this letter, she wasn't happy about it, or something like that, and her having a conversation with Yolanda on the phone in relation to, I guess, her receiving that letter. We also have Yolanda herself saying that she did FedEx the letter to Selena and that Selena wouldn't accept the letter or whatever. And so what they're trying to say with this letter is that Yolanda wasn't actually fired after that meeting on the 9th with the family. She herself was resigning and she didn't want to work with the family anymore. So what they were also saying is that basically she was still on the payroll, it seemed, or something like that. And she was, I guess, still associated with the company or with Selena's family, but she was the one who wanted to end that relationship. And then we also see people who are being interviewed in this documentary. We have one journalist, I can't recall her name, and she's basically talking about how, this letter if you're trying to have an open and shut case about a disgruntled employee doing this, obviously you're not going to want to present this letter because it's going to make it harder for you to prove your case if this is a person who is resigning and kind of not disgruntled in the sense that they want to retaliate for being fired. Then we also have I think Detective Larry, who was the one who was talking to Yolanda when she was in the car. He was talking about how, I guess, the evidence list of like what they have in their possession related to the case. He was saying that the letter was just written or described as a letter from ex-attorney, and it didn't really give the details of what was in the letter. And so obviously if you're someone who's going through that list, you're not going to know that this letter is important because you have to go to the letter itself to read it and determine if it is important to whatever argument you want to make. And so I did think that how they talked about this letter was very intriguing because I did just do an episode on a TV show called The Trial, and we had that scene where the prosecutor, she realized that there was something that they hadn't looked at because it was buried in a box or whatever, and so she wanted to do the right thing and make sure that the judge was aware of that receipt that would have exonerated the person who was on trial. And so here you have a similar situation. So you have this letter that's not really cataloged properly and people aren't aware of the significance of it. Would it have changed things? Maybe. I'm not really sure how people would have handled knowing all of this evidence at the time that this situation was happening back in 1995, but it is an intriguing possibility to consider that it possibly could have changed the outcome of everything that happened. Alright, so going into my fourth key point, Yolanda's job orientation call. And so throughout this episode, we are very aware that Yolanda's family is saying that they have basically this documentation, this evidence, whatever, that paints a completely different picture of what happened. And so we have Tina, who is Yolanda's niece, and she's kind of really speaking on behalf of the family. You see two other family members involved in this first episode. And what Tina points out is that basically sometime after Yolanda had that meeting with the family on March 9th, that Yolanda had some family members come down to basically help her clean out her apartment so that she could basically move back to San Antonio because she is a registered nurse. And so what they're basically saying is that Yolanda was moving on from her life. She wasn't this disgruntled employee that they were making her out to be. And so then we see Tina talking about how when they packed up all of Yolanda's stuff, they packed up her answering machine. And so she's able to recover basically whatever messages were on the answering machine, and they have obviously preserved it for 25 plus years. And so Denise ends up playing a voice message from Yolanda's answering machine, and it's somebody from a potential new job that Yolanda would have had, and they're basically calling to let her know about orientation. And so what Tina, Yolanda's niece, is basically saying is that Yolanda was moving on from the situation. She was trying to find another job. She was not worried or kind of like really pressed about being let go, being fired, resigning, whatever, from Selena's company and her role within Selena's life business-wide. And so one thing I was really intrigued by when I heard this was I was very confused on whether or not back then in 1995, if you went home and you wanted to listen to your voice messages, were you able to call whatever number and play them? And so I was very curious about when Yolanda heard these messages. Did she hear them like the same day, or did she basically hear these voice messages much later when her family played them for her or whatever? And so I wasn't quite sure whether or not Yolanda actually heard these messages or if she's never heard them. And so I guess in a sense it doesn't really matter if she's heard the messages, but it does point to the fact that yes, she was moving on with her life. We also, going into my fifth point, we also hear voice messages that Selena has made to Yolanda just days before the murder. And so this is all very intriguing because this shows that Selena is actively trying to get in touch with Yolanda. He doesn't really seem upset or anything like that. In fact, she does call Yolanda Buffy, which they had talked about. This was a term of endearment to show that you were in Selena's inner circle. And so it was just really chilling to hear Selena's voice like that because once I knew what they were talking about voice messages, it was possible that they were going to play something that Selena left for Yolanda on her answering machine. And so once I actually heard it, I was just shocked that we were listening to this, and obviously this is being used to show that, Selena was trying to get in touch with Yolanda. It didn't seem like there was any hostility or anything like that in the messages that she was leaving to Yolanda. And we did hear that one thing where she was talking about how Yolanda should be home to receive these messages and the fact that it was expensive for her to make that call from the plane, that sort of thing. And so we do see her kind of like giving her a hard time, ribbing her, whatever, for not being available to take her call. But other than that, the voice messages from Selena themselves, nothing was super alarming or pointing to the fact that Yolanda had a reason to be scared of Selena. One thing I do want to hit home on was that basically towards the end of the episode, we do see that they kind of shift the focus to Abraham. And so we do see throughout the episode, they're talking about how Selena didn't want her dad involved with her businesses. She was really kind of trying to separate herself from the family or from him in that aspect. And then obviously we have Yolanda talking about the secret that she was keeping from her family. And so they really wanted to prove or show that Abraham was just a controlling person, that he's done things to other people. And I thought it was really interesting that they were kind of going this route because it didn't really make sense in the context of what happened between Yolanda and Selena specifically. Like, this narrative would have made sense if Yolanda had shot Abraham instead of Selena, because if you're so scared of Abraham, why are you shooting his daughter? And when it seems like you don't have a reason to be afraid of her, when it seems like you guys are willing to talk to each other, you guys are planning to meet up, that sort of thing. And so I was just really intrigued by the fact that they were kind of painting Abraham in this light. And I have no idea whether or not he actually is this way, but I thought that narrative didn't really, it was relevant in the sense that it was trying to explain why Yolanda purchased a gun, why she was afraid for her safety, but she didn't express feeling unsafe around Selena, so it didn't make sense why she had the gun when she was planning to meet with Selena. Like, if she had said that she didn't know if Abraham was coming to the meeting with Selena or that sort of thing, she didn't know if she was going to be ambushed, that would make sense, but that wasn't her argument. And so I just didn't really understand why Abraham is relevant in terms of explaining what happened in that hotel room between Yolanda and Selena. So yeah, that is where the first episode ends. So to go ahead and wrap all of this up, I do want to hit home that obviously everything that we saw in this first episode does support the fact that they had a close relationship. And I feel like there's almost no sense and obviously there's no point in denying that, but I also felt like it was kind of clear that they did have a close relationship, especially if you saw the Selena movie. I was like 7 or 8 years old when this happened, or I think this happened in 95, so I was like 6 or 7 years old. And so I wasn't really reading the news articles to like hear about this, and then I think I first only became aware of Selena when the movie came out. And so I don't know what the news coverage was like in terms of how they portrayed the relationship. They did make it seem like she was like this crazy fan, but they also talked about how she was the fan club president, and so obviously there had to be a much closer relationship than just some random person starting a fan club. And so I don't deny at all that there was a close relationship between these two women. But I also want to say that the fact that they had this close relationship, and you obviously want to understand what happened leading up to Selena's murder, but it didn't change the fact that something went horribly wrong in that hotel room when they met. We still have mixed stories on what happened in that hotel room. The fact that they were close doesn't negate the fact that something went wrong in that hotel room. And so I'm just going to leave that there. I am excited to see the second episode and the rest of the series. Hopefully it is worth watching. I don't know what else we're going to learn from Yolanda's point of view, and then also from the people who were involved in the case in a official capacity. But I did enjoy watching this first episode, just for the fact that we get to continue talking about Selena. Obviously, I hope that there's nothing like super disparaging that comes out, because again, she's not here to defend herself. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.